Meantime, I would like to introduce very precisely Dr. Soham Guha. Harshada or Vaishnavi is here. The students are very dynamic. Time and again, they help us. Dr. Soham Guha represents the Bengali science fiction Kalpabigyan, a very young and dynamic scholar. Right from the beginning of his career, he has given substantial contribution to the field of Indian science fiction in general and Bengali science fiction in particular. A multidimensional, multilingual scholar, Soham Guha is the future of Indian science fiction. See the beginning of the career of Sachin Tendulkar in the field of cricket. So is the beginning of Soham Guha in the field of science fiction. Our good friend, a very dynamic scholar and witty critic. His communication is nothing but a heart-to-heart dialogue held in a long and meaningful way. Way back in the organization of International Symposium, we enjoyed the witty lecture of Soham Guha sir, but now he has ample and sufficient time. Smitanjali, I think you should, if it is not possible, you should present the picture after Soham Guha sir. Isn't it? So let us proceed and invite Honorable Soham Guha sir from Calcutta, Bangalore. Honorable Mr. Soham Guha sir, please.
Thank you, Navdeep, for your kind introduction.
Welcome, Soham. Arvind Mishra here.
Thank you, Arvind sir. So with both of your permission, should I proceed with
please.
Thank you.
Now request ball is in the court of Soham Guha sir. Please, you can share the screen and proceed as per your plan.
So my topic is about the significance and presence of dystopia in Bengali science fiction, and that is Kalpabigyan. So good morning to you all, the curators, signatories, critics, writers, and scholars of Indian science fiction. Thank you, Dhew College, Maharashtra, Indian Association for Science Fiction Studies, Bangalore, Indian Science Fiction
Please
Writers
increase the volume. Please increase the volume.
Indian Science Fiction Writers Association, Uttar Pradesh, and Kalpabigyan for giving me this opportunity. Today, I will speak about the presence and significance of dystopia in Bengali science fiction, that is Kalpabigyan. So before I present my topic, I will present a question to the audience. Are we living in a dystopia? If so, why? To me, dystopia is a treatment or action of the privileged or the mass in a speculative world that is often has roots in the behavior towards or of a marginalized community in our real world. Dystopia, since the days of Orwell and Huxley, have become such deep-rooted understanding of the struggle in and of a secondary world that is now one of the dominant subgenres in the speculative fiction. The reason for degradation is artificial or natural, often repercussions of the follies of man or some divine punishment. Either way, every dystopia acts as a quill poculent for a mindscape and lets the peril prevail over just or vice versa, depending on the narrative. Torments of the characters become cathartic arcs. Observing the growth of the protagonist, we grow ourselves and perceive the world as a keen observer and reactor. In our dream, we all become Harrison Bergerons. Because of our turmoil, at times melancholic past, SF in India is a pluralistic, multilateral narrative. In my very little experience as a reader of Kalpabigyan, the stories I have found to be dystopic convey that same form. The first among them is Monu Dadosh, or The Time of Rudra Shaborni, the 12th father of humankind. Published in 1964, this is by Premendra Mitra himself, the master of Bengali science fiction, and it is of the same essence. As Robert Silverberg's At Winter's End, H.G. Wells's The Time Machine, A.E. Van Vocht's The Book of Pita or the 1200 million AD, and the popular video game Horizon Zero Dawn. It is about an Earth of far future when humankind has reverted, devolved into their primitive roots, dwelling again on the topics of hunter-gatherer, fallen from the grace as the masters of our world. The story begins with a hunt. The prey is a male from the patriarchal Pravarkan clan, and the predators are females from the Krufum sect, under the iron fist of a matriarch. There is also another group called Yosov. There was a nuclear holocaust in the deep past, and the world has healed since then. The wandering of the Saptoshi Mondal in the sky tells us how much time has passed. Yet mankind, because they were the perpetrators of this pan-world catastrophe, still bears the gamma ray scars that are passed from generation to generation. Because of this, impotency is a prevalent problem. To combat, each clan kidnaps members of others to pass their genetic heritage. The story unfolds after the elope of a Romeo-Juliet pair who escapes in the depths of the elusive Timicondor, the belly of a whale, a supposed underground bunker of the refugees of the Holocaust age. Written in the early days of the nuclear age when Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Castle Bravo, Starfish Prime, Chakar or Tsar Bomba were exhibiting the world their horrendous destructive might, and the world shook like a tuning fork by these artificial shockwaves. Almost 2 decades before Chernobyl, Premendra Mitra envisioned the 2 cataclysmic scope of these megaton little suns. Mohandas acts, as I stated, as a mirror of our current world or that presented in the 60s. The clash between the changers tell us the oppressed role of women in the newly independent India. The stalemate is a satirical jab at the sudden population explosion of India and the devastated citizens of Japan. The characters themselves are fitting representations of our myopic visions of the future, where the future comes when the tales of SF becomes newspaper articles. The protagonists will not be the scientists as we foresee. No, they will be politicians and lawyers, because we are inheriting a battered world with little room to build something new and much preference to fix what is already broken by our predecessors, like our vanishing ecosystem. The second fiction is Pepre Puran, or The Legend of the Ants, as again by Premendra Mitra. Written in 1929, just 3 years after a communal riot at Kolkata, this piece is about the class struggle of our nation. The story begins with familiarizing the readers with a changed landscape by making paradigms and comparisons. Quoting Devjani Sengupta's Sadhan Babu's Friends, Science Fiction in Bengal from 1882 to 1961, Mitra hints at a time when the very existence of humans will be endangered, when common flowers and trees will be a thing of the past. Looking at the small riots of the contemporary time, perhaps Mitra anticipated a more communal violences, perhaps even partition itself. If not, then when the ants, the rivals of men in this story, began their conquest or the division of the civilized world, why did they dissect the landmass along a certain geopolitical line, the 70-degree latitude? From the annals of the survivors, it was observed that the ants emerging from the wombs of Andes hollowed out the bedrock under every human metropolis. At a sequential manner, when these cities collapsed, opening gaping sinkholes of enormous mouths, taking countless lives, the rest of the world, too busy with their quarrels, barely took notice. It is as if looking at the early fragmented struggle of Indian independence, outside the grasp or scope of the British presidencies. Fresh out of the trenches of the World War to end all wars, the contemporary readers might have gasped at Mitra's prophetic use of chemical and biological annihilation instruments. Just years after the commence of the Geneva Protocol, the ants act as kamikaze chemical bombers, and they poisoned entire reservoirs with the human even used certain wavelengths of their bioluminescence to blind their ceaseless human enemies. Final war for South Africa. From the reports of these genocide survivors, later captive of the ants, Sukhumai Sarkar, the readers find out about the societal structure of the ant hive, the stark division between each classes of the ants and how they communicate in high frequency tongue, inaudible to human ears. How they treated Sarkar as one of their own, or how they had domesticated rats to use as horses, all characteristics of a sentient species. Mitros Pipre Puran, though is about a war between two very different species on a superficial level, is about our subcontinent's people, about the difference on religion, communal, and even fundamentalistic levels, and how they are struggling to find their place in a crowded triangular crossroad of the world. It is a tale of mutualistic conflict, understanding, and cooperative habitation. The third is called Odhik Sohore Tamasha, the quip of an excess city, and it is written by Siddhartha Ghosh, also known as Amitabh Ghosh. This story, with hints of a cyberpunk society, was written in 1989 as a passenger of the same boat as Lundwall's 2018 AD, or the King Kong Blues. It is a world where presumably the Nazis has won the Second World War. However, unlike the extreme totalitarian treatment like Philip K. Dick's Man in High Castle, this world appears more open, at least to the apparent eyes. However, this is a world of exhausted resources, stark economic disparity, insensitivity to certain aspects of life, such as death, and opaque to the expression of human emotions. The fourth story is again by Siddhartha Ghosh, and it is called MOHAKASHER MONIMUKTO, or the Jewels of Space, where the corporate greed has taken the colonization of Australia approach to outer space. Here, our exhausted world is stabilized by the continuous inflow of resources from the heart of the exoplanets outside both the geographical and political reach of our Terran government. One of them is the bustling mining operation on the inhabitable rock called Kornika. The story opens with the destruction of a spaceship that supposedly ended lives of 117 school students who were gifted a supposedly happy trip of the outer worlds of Sol. Outside the reach of the optical telescopes, this accident happened in the darkness of cosmos and left no survivors. Rahul, the grief-struck protagonist of this story, the father of one of the casualties named Rima, when he hears the broadcast, finds his life as darkened as the overcast, thunderous sky outside. Immediately, we see his ex-wife, Joya, call him and get a glimpse of the failed marriage, the fractured childhood of Rima, and the short of account common between divorced parents. He asks her whose bed she warmed last night and tells her to shed her emotions as it gets in the way of her manufactured beauty. In his hunt for answers, Rahul finds about the passengers of the rocket, ill-fated rocket D7, and that all were girls, same in age as with his daughter, all blooming, gorgeous flowers of maiden youth. Speaking with the teachers of his daughter's school, he speculates of a sinister purpose of this accident, as if the whole shenanigan was nothing but fabricated truth. The company responsible for the voyage was a subsidiary and a shell company called Milliket, owned by a corporate giant called Lechner and Mukherjee International. The company dominating the exoplanet mining landscape and the planet Kornika. Kornika, because of its hazardous, even impelling position as a planet, was temporarily home to those without a future. Only those imprisoned with a life sentence were sent as workers, like slave bees working for a queen. In search for truth, he seeks a meeting with the only person who escaped from Kornika, Deep Narayan, only to know that he tried to escape his Terran prison yesterday and was killed for his action. The sinister scope of these interconnected incidents unfolds before Rahul as he sees these of disposing of the sole witnesses. Kornika, because of its hostile environment, remoteness, and the nature of the men living there, is a living hell. to keep the workers in balance and to detach them from the harsh reality. And as a distraction, the company introduced pornography in Kornika. However, the virtual resource was soon exhausted and it was not quoting Ghosh, the real deal. As an attempt to establish order in the devilish men inhabiting Kornika, the company is sending a group of virgin children who will be adults by the time the ship reaches its diabolical destination to quench the primordial thirst of the inhabitants. Perhaps inspired by the accounts of Belgian Congo and many other African colonial regimes of a gone era, Ghosh created a gouging story of distorted subhumanism. Here, the bifurcation of mankind, or a limb of it, has reached its monstrous epitome, away from the warmth of our world. This guttering narrative, written in 1989, shows us the struggle of a lone parent against the entire world, the premeditated fabrication of his death to erase the truth, and the maleficent evolution of human greed. Ghosh, and us have inherited a world broken by the iron fist of colonialism. From its grave rose capitalism and the endless drive of making money, disregarding the cost of human lives, society, and bonds. Ghosh, through the eyes of a grief-struck father, asks a simple question, a question again and again asked by moralists, philosophers, and messiahs. What is the price of a human life? A question more relevant than it was ever before. Looking outside our familiar bubble, we see monarchies turning it into totalitarian regimes, into failed democracies, and then into chaos. The emergence of groups in the pockets of world turning that place into a graveyard like Kornika. Like all dystopic fiction, Ghosh's work stands out as a warning, counting on the reemergence of the devil that lives within us. Then the fifth one is Anish Dev and his Tej Khonda Shatme and Shatme Tej Khonda duology. In his work, Anish Dev takes the reader to a world similar to the speculative works like Dashner's The Maze Runner, Roth's Divergent, Collins' The Hunger Games, or King's The Running Man. Even the film franchise Ghosh, but preceding almost all of them in seniority. Here, the grave financial disparity between rich and poor in a heavily contested world where the individual lives have been mercilessly commodified. The only way left for the protagonist Jishan to climb the financial stability ladder is by participating in the survival games, dancing with death. It is an entertainment for the rich of the new city and a struggle made both to make both ends meet for the poor of the old city. It is a story of exploitation and salvation. They created this world perhaps as a jab of the economic disparity of modern India. Since its publication, these two books have been the best-selling nail-biting dystopic fiction in Kalpabigyan. Beneath the layered characters, the hammy villain, the struggling protagonist, this duology is a story of finding or rather rediscovering humanity. Here, I must talk about the influences these works had on me. All the stories I write or try to write at least are on this theme, dystopia. There are two worlds I created on this genre. Both is available or will be available.
There's some problem with the voice.
First is Shoiter Gan, or The Song of Ice, translated by Onava Sinha for the upcoming Golan's Anthology of South Asian Science Fiction and Fantasy, and the other is Dhew, or Our Lives on Tide, appears in the MOS 5.5 Megastructure Anthology, and it is now a part of NASA's Peregrine Lander payload. Both stories appear in Bengali in the pages of Kalpabigyan. A winter, be it nuclear or volcanic, or something as twisting as mutation of Earth's orbit around the sun, has been visited by writers like before me, like Nalika Sir's The Ice Age Cometh and Shishendu Mukhopadhyay's Shomoy in It Happened Tomorrow. In Riddle's The Winter World and Dimitri Grotowski's The Metro Trilogy. It is an well-visited theme in SF writing. Standing before the works of the giants As a college student back then, I tried to create a Kolkata mauled by a volcanic winter where the survivors had kept themselves warm inside the claustrophobic metropolis. Like I said, dystopia acts as a populace. Our long history as a group of diverse yet fragmented people creates clash in such condensed, suffocating, competed space. As the warmth of our colonization freezes, our past comes back to haunt us. Our religious, regional, even financial differences, often subtle during the summer of humanity, comes out as deep gorgeous. Yet, Song of Winter is a story of brotherhood. The brothers made aliens by the Radcliffe Line. Being the descendant of a partition survivor myself, there are many stories passed on from generation to generation. All these played a subconscious role. This story is about the possibilities hidden within us to coexist, to cooperate for survival and a better future. Currently, I am expanding this story into a novel. The context of a pluralistic societal structures and the story of Mahaplavana, written in our Puran, influenced me to write Dhew or Our Lives on Tides. Here, in a world where the nothing but a near panthalassa sea created by the collision of Halley's comet with the moon, mankind finds themselves in the sanctuary of floating megacities, artificial sailing islands of concrete, plastic, and steel. Here, because of the conspicuous shortage of living space and the underlying shortage of resources, any marriage not prescribed by the city states are predominantly discouraged, a criminal offense. So a man who loved someone he was not supposed to finds himself as an involuntary messiah for his blue world, as he is instructed to destroy the hanging ice fortress, the last largest remnants of Halley in the low Earth orbit, to evade a mega tsunami if he falls. But he never returns to Earth because of his unprescribed love is found out by a cruel coming to fruition in the execution of his mission. As he drifts unanchored before his home, his mother comes to him, and how she clung to a jar full of dirt. The dirt was his home has already lost to him. He understands the importance of the dirt and how inherently, despite how far we grow apart, our roots will always call us back. Our Lives on Tides is a story of life, of the importance of individual lives and how astute it is against the baleful iron claw of a dictatorship or the grace of Mother Nature. Here are some pieces of fiction I had read, but because of the time constant, I will just mention their names. One is Riju Ganguly's Decagon, and the second is Anushtup Sheth's Mission Prithvi. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Soham Guha ji. Very effective and witty presentation, thought-oriented and witty presentation. We are proud of you that the way you have a very deep survey of all the works associated with dystopian society as fictionalized in Bengali science fiction with reference to Kalpabigyan. See, the title is very witty, Kalpabigyan.
Yeah.
How can you correlate between Vigyan and Kalpana, that is science and imagination? Please, precisely.
Sir, the science as it emerged, the way it emerged from the ways during the Renaissance times is kind of dry, don't you see? But if we mix with it the imaginative dreams of the literature, it becomes something, well, most beautiful to both read and hear. Because to me, Kalpabigyan and science fiction in general are stories of our future, our dreams coming into speculative fusion. So without Kalpana or imagination in fiction, in Vigyan or science, it is impossible to envision a world that will be, say, 5,000 years after us. We need to have our third eye opened to see them before our own eyes, right? And
Yes.
like Balfonkesa said, I tried that on my best to write in both English and Bengali to spread the Indian science fiction and Kalpabigyan to a broader audience. And because Balfonkesa's The It Happened Tomorrow was one of the first works that influenced me to write. And yes, I was back then, I was class 7, so it has a profound effect.
Thank you, Soham Guha.
Thank you,
very
Nable sir.
much for an effective and merry-making morning with your intellectual deliberation. I
Thank
put
you,
on
sir.
record